Hey guys, tonight we're sailing into the vast, star-speckled darkness of the Pacific Ocean, with nothing but the heavens as our guide. You're standing on the edge of a slender outrigger canoe, the wood worn smooth by generations of voyages, the salt spray misting your face as the hull slices through waves that have carried explorers for thousands of years. There's no compass, no map, just the slow roll of the sea and the glittering sky above. So clear it feels like you could reach up and pluck a star from its place. Now, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes out here without Google Maps. But the Polynesian Navigators, they didn't just survive, they thrived, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean with nothing but memory, observation, and an almost supernatural connection to nature.
So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love imagining all of you drifting off in different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the silence. No engines, no creaking ship timbers, just the rhythmic lap of water against the hull and the occasional sigh of wind in the sails. The canoe is a masterpiece of simplicity, lashed together with coconut fiber, its sail woven from pandanus leaves. You're not just a passenger here, you're an apprentice, and your teacher, a master navigator, squints at the horizon with eyes that have memorized the dance of stars.
Mainstream history loves to credit European explorers for discovering the Pacific, but Polynesians had already mapped it, mentally, orally, mythically, centuries before. Here's a quirky tidbit. They didn't just follow stars, they named them after everyday objects. That bright one, the shark's tooth. That cluster, the net of the fisherman. It's like celestial IKEA instructions. Historians still argue whether Polynesians intentionally settled every island they reached, or if some landfalls were happy accidents. But when you're leaning over the side of this canoe, watching bioluminescent plankton flicker like underwater stars, it's hard to believe anything about this was accidental. A master navigator hands you his toolkit, just a few simple objects that look like children's toys at first glance. A bundle of knotted coconut fiber cords, a handful of worn cowrie shells, a smooth wooden board with notches carved along the edges. These are the instruments that mapped an ocean twice the size of Russia. You run your fingers along the Senate cord, feeling each knot that represents a star path. The cowrie shells clack softly as you turn them over in your palm, each one standing for an island, its position memorized through endless repetition. The wooden board is a wave compass, its edges marked with the swell patterns of different sea regions. It's shockingly low-tech until you realize it's actually the world's most sophisticated navigation computer, refined over 3,000 years of trial and error. Here's something modern sailors would appreciate. Polynesian navigators had their own version of dead reckoning. They'd estimate position by memorizing their speed, measured in canoe lengths per swell, and direction tracked by a star's movement. The quirky part? They'd often chew a particular seaweed that helped prevent seasickness while doing these complex mental calculations. Historians still argue whether these tools were primarily mnemonic devices or actual measurement instruments. What's undeniable is that with just these simple objects and their trained senses, navigators could pinpoint their location within a few miles after weeks at sea. A feat European sailors with compasses and sextants wouldn't match until the 18th century. A master shows you how to hold the wave compass flat in the water, reading the patterns like Braille. The Pacific has distinct swell highways that remain constant for thousands of miles. You learn to distinguish the long walk of equatorial swells from the short step of coastal waves, feeling the rhythm through your bare feet on the canoe's hull. It's like learning to hear the ocean's heartbeat.
As night falls completely, the master navigator begins pointing out star families, not the Western constellations you might recognize, but living genealogies that tell stories across generations. That cluster there, they call it Te Punga, the anchor stone, with each bright star representing a different voyaging ancestor. The Milky Way isn't just a hazy band of light here. It's Te Ikaroa a Maui, the great fish Maui pulled from the depths. Its stars marking the pathways between islands.
You're taught to look for the houses, specific stars that rise and set at consistent points along the horizon, acting as celestial signposts. The navigator names them in a melodic chant. Hokulae rises there, Hikianalia there, Kealiokonaikalewa guards the southern path. Each name carries generations of observational wisdom, passed down through oral tradition with near scientific precision. The quirky detail? Many star houses have backup cousin stars that take over navigation duties when clouds obscure the primary markers. Nature's own redundancy system. Here's a mainstream fact that might surprise you. Polynesians recognize the precession of equinoxes, the gradual shift in star positions over centuries, long before Western astronomers documented it. They compensated by periodically updating their star chants, an early form of celestial software updates.
Historians still argue whether these star families represented actual biological lineages or metaphorical relationships. What's undeniable is how this system transformed the night sky from random dots into a structured, living map. As you lie back in the canoe, the stars above begin rearranging themselves in your mind. No longer scattered points of light, but a vast, interconnected web of stories and pathways. The navigator whispers, "The sky doesn't guide us, we become part of it." The canoe rises and falls beneath you as you learn to read the ocean's surface like a language. Your instructor demonstrates how to dip a hand overboard, fingers spread to feel the direction of subsurface currents, those invisible rivers flowing beneath the waves. The Pacific isn't just an empty expanse to Polynesian navigators. It's a textured landscape of swells, ripples, and color variations, each with distinct meanings. That dark patch ahead, a deep current carrying warmer water and possibly fish. That sudden flattening of waves, a subsurface ridge that might indicate land hundreds of miles away. The most surprising tool in this watery lexicon is something called sea glitter, the way sunlight dances differently on water depending on what lies beneath. Navigators could spot the unique sparkle of lagoons reflecting through clouds long before seeing the islands themselves. Here's a quirky fact. Master navigators would sometimes taste the ocean spray to determine their position. Different island groups had distinct mineral signatures in their waters, a sort of oceanic terroir. The most prized skill was detecting te lapa, underwater lightning, faint electrical flashes that some navigators claim emanate from islands over the horizon. Historians still argue whether these wave-reading techniques were systematic enough to qualify as a true science, or remained more art than method. What's undeniable is their effectiveness. Polynesian navigators could detect islands up to 80 kilometers away just by reading wave patterns, a skill modern science still can't fully explain. As you practice distinguishing swell directions, the rhythm starts making sense. The long, rolling waves from the southeast, the choppier interference patterns from the west. The ocean transforms from a chaotic expanse into a pulsing, living map. Your instructor smiles as you correctly identify a subtle current change. Now you're beginning to hear the ocean speak.
A shadow glides overhead. Not a cloud, but a frigate bird with wings so wide they momentarily blot out the stars. Your navigator grins as the bird circles twice before continuing westward. Land, he murmurs, though you've seen nothing but endless ocean for days. Frigate birds, you learn, are nature's perfect compasses. They never sleep on water, always returning to land at dusk. Spot one at midday, and you're within about 80 kilometers of an island. The navigator teaches you the 5 birds that matter: the frigate bird for long-distance direction, the tern for nearby land, the booby for fishing grounds, the petrel for weather changes, and, most importantly, the noddy, whose evening flight path forms perfect arrows toward sheltered atolls. There's a quirky trick here. Navigators would sometimes keep a tame noddy aboard, releasing it when they suspected land was near. If it returned, with fish in its beak, time to start looking for palm trees on the horizon. Here's a mainstream fact that changes how you see ocean exploration. Polynesians likely discovered nearly every habitable Pacific island centuries before Europeans, because they followed bird migration patterns rather than sailing blindly. The most remote islands often had the most reliable bird signs, nature's perfect breadcrumb trail. Historians still argue whether Polynesian navigators consciously understood birds' maximum flight ranges or simply followed empirical observations. What's undeniable is their precision. Maori traditions record navigators predicting landfall within hours based solely on bird behavior, a skill that saved countless lives on months-long voyages. As dusk falls, you watch noddies streak like feathered meteors toward some unseen shore. The navigator begins a low chant, not about stars or waves this time, but about wings and homecomings. The rhythm matches your breathing, and for the first time, you realize you're not just learning navigation, you're learning how to listen to a world that's always been speaking. The rhythm of the waves changes subtly as the navigator begins recounting the long pause, that mysterious 1,500-year gap when Polynesian expansion suddenly stopped. You can almost feel the ocean holding its breath as he describes how, around 800 CE, the greatest seafaring culture on Earth inexplicably stopped voyaging. The outriggers remained in their sheds. The star chants grew quieter. The Pacific, once crisscrossed with roots, fell into an eerie stillness. Archaeologists have found smoking gun evidence in ancient garbage heaps. Suddenly, no more exotic shells or volcanic glass from distant islands. Just local fish bones and coconuts, year after year. The quirky clue? Pollen records show breadfruit trees stopped spreading between islands during this period. Even nature paused its wandering. Here's the mainstream theory: a perfect storm of climate shifts, rising sea levels changing familiar currents, prolonged El Niño events disrupting weather patterns made voyaging too unpredictable. But there's a more intriguing possibility buried in oral histories. Some chants speak of Te Wāhi, the time of forgetting, when navigators began dying faster than they could train replacements. Too many shortcuts, too much reliance on growing technology rather than deep knowledge. Sounds uncomfortably familiar, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether this was truly a pause or if secret voyages continued during this period. The most tantalizing debate centers on Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Did Polynesians really reach it right before the long pause began? Or were they already there centuries earlier? The answer changes everything about this maritime mystery. As your canoe rocks in the swell, the navigator's voice drops to a whisper. "We almost lost it all," he confesses. The stars still rose in their houses, the waves still spoke, but fewer and fewer listened. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's heavy with the weight of centuries almost forgotten. The navigator's hands trace shapes in the air as he recounts the legend of Maui,
Not the Disney version, but the original trickster demigod who fished up islands with his magical hook. You're half drowsing when he casually mentions something startling. That hook might have been real, not magic, but an ingenious navigation tool, possibly a carved wooden instrument for measuring star angles, passed down through generations as sacred technology before being mythologized. He shows you how it might have worked, using a curved palm frond to demonstrate. Held at arm's length, the curve could frame specific stars near the horizon, helping estimate latitude. The quirky detail? Some traditional hooks had notches corresponding to the altitudes of key stars over major islands, a sort of analog GPS. When European missionaries collected these fishing hooks as curiosities, they may have been destroying the last pieces of an ancient navigation computer.
Here's a mainstream fact that blurs the line between myth and history. The same stars mentioned in Maui legends, Hokulea, Arcturus, and Hikianalia, Spica, were still being used for navigation when Captain Cook arrived centuries later. The stories weren't just entertainment. They were encrypted instruction manuals. Historians still argue whether Maui was based on an actual historical figure, perhaps a revolutionary navigator whose techniques were so advanced they seemed supernatural. The most heated debates center on the fish he supposedly pulled up. Were these actual islands discovered through his methods? Or symbolic representations of celestial knowledge rising from the depths of experimentation? As the navigator resumes chanting, you notice something you'd missed before. The rhythm mimics the rocking of a canoe, the pauses aligning perfectly with wave crests. These aren't just stories. They're vibrational maps, designed to be felt in your bones on night watches. The starlight seems to pulse in time, and for a fleeting moment, you swear you can almost see Maui's hook glinting among the constellations. The stars suddenly feel closer as the navigator whispers the name Tupaya, the polymath priest who memorized over 100 islands' positions and drew a mental map so accurate it left Captain Cook's officers speechless. You're about to dismiss this as exaggeration when he produces a replica of that legendary map. Not parchment with neat lines, but a dynamic, ever-adjusting mental model that accounted for currents, seasons, and even trade winds. Tupaya's genius lay in his interactive knowledge. When Cook's crew pointed to a random spot on their charts, he could instantly name the nearest islands, their resources, and sailing directions, all while standing on the rolling deck of the Endeavor. The quirky detail, his directions always included sailing songs, specific chants to maintain rhythm during each leg of the journey. Modern experiments show these songs perfectly match optimal paddle cadences for different sea conditions. Here's the mainstream fact that rewrites exploration history. When Cook's scientists tested Tupaya by asking him to locate obscure atolls, he was correct 90% of the time, better than their chronometers and sextants. His true masterpiece? Teaching a dying art to Joseph Banks draftsmen, resulting in the only surviving Polynesian-style navigation chart drawn during the Age of Discovery. Historians still argue whether Tupaya fully grasped European cartography or simply humored Cook's men. The most poignant debate concerns his death. Did European diseases kill him, or was it heartbreak after realizing his knowledge might vanish? As your canoe drifts, the navigator sings one of Tupaya's surviving chants, each verse shifting subtly to match the swell's changing rhythm. The stars above seem to brighten in response, ancestors acknowledging a kindred spirit. Clouds drift across the moon as the navigator teaches you the art of seeing through overcast skies, a skill that separated adequate sailors from true masters. You're skeptical until he demonstrates the blind navigation techniques. reading wind patterns on your cheeks, detecting land by the taste of airborne pollen, even interpreting the behavior of jellyfish beneath the canoe. The ocean, you realize, is never truly featureless, just waiting for the right senses to perceive it. The most fascinating trick involves stretching out on the canoe's platform, back against the wood, and feeling wave reflections from distant islands through your spine. Some navigators could detect land up to 30 kilometers away this way, long before it was visible. The quirky part? They'd often remove their ear ornaments during these sessions, not for silence, but because the bone conduction through their jaws provided better wave vibration readings. Here's a mainstream fact that modern science confirms. Polynesian navigators were effectively using Fourier analysis centuries before mathematicians formalized it, deconstructing complex wave patterns into their component swells through sheer tactile experience. Their bodies became living spectrographs. Historians still argue whether these techniques were systematically teachable or required innate talent. The most intriguing archaeological finds supporting these claims are navigational stones on some atolls, not carved maps as once thought, but wave simulation tools for training apprentices during calm weather. As you lie prone on the canoe, the wood humming beneath you, something remarkable happens. With your eyes closed, you begin distinguishing the texture of different wave sets, the long, smooth rolls from open ocean versus the chopped interference patterns bouncing back from some unseen landmass. The navigator whispers, "Now you're not just sailing on the ocean, you're listening to its dreams." The scent of toasted coconut and fermented breadfruit suddenly cuts through the salty air as the navigator unpacks provisions from a woven palm leaf container. You're about to dismiss ancient seafaring snacks as bland survival food until he hands you a sticky, sweet tart paste that instantly revives your energy. This is pia, a preserved starch made from arrowroot that could last for months in tropical heat, the Polynesian equivalent of energy gels. But the real masterpiece is ma, fish packed in fermented coconut cream, vacuum sealed in gourds through natural lactic acid fermentation. It sounds questionable until you taste it. Tangy, rich, and packed with probiotics to maintain gut health on long voyages. The quirky detail? Navigators knew to eat Soten fish organs raw for vitamin C, preventing scurvy, 1,000 years before James Linn's clinical trials. They even had their own version of electrolytes, seawater diluted with fresh coconut water in precise ratios. Here's a mainstream fact that'll change how you view Pacific exploration. The successful settlement of Polynesia depended as much on transporting viable crops as navigation skills. Canoes carried living pantries, sprouting coconuts, young breadfruit saplings, and even soil with edible earthworms. The most valued crew member wasn't the strongest paddler, but the best horticulturist. Historians still argue whether Polynesians intentionally introduced species like the Polynesian rat to new islands, or if these were stowaways. The ecological impact is undeniable. From Hawaii to New Zealand, their voyages reshaped entire ecosystems. As you chew a piece of smoked flying fish, another ingenious preservation method, the navigator murmurs, "We didn't just cross oceans, we brought our gardens with us." The navigator's calloused hands suddenly grip your shoulders as he describes, coup, the brutal initiation every apprentice endured before touching a steering paddle. For weeks, you'd be forced to sit motionless in a rocking canoe under the blistering sun, forbidden to eat or drink until you could name every star reflected in the water's surface. The true test came during sleep deprivation trials, 4 nights awake while reciting genealogies of waves, each with their own names and behaviors. You learn of the sand charts, elaborate mazes raked into beach sand, where blindfolded students had to navigate by foot feel alone. The most grueling exercise? Being set adrift at night in a circle of logs lashed together, forced to deduce your location from a single constellation visible through a narrow gap. The quirky part? Successful graduates received a unique tattoo under their eyelids, invisible to others. But whenever they blinked, the slight pressure reminded them of their oath to the star.
Here's a mainstream fact that puts modern education to shame. This training produced a 95% success rate for open ocean voyages, higher than modern flight schools' pass rates. The dropout rate, however, was equally staggering. Only 1 in 20 apprentices completed the full curriculum. Historians still argue whether these methods constituted cruel hazing or necessary psychological conditioning. Recent studies of Micronesian navigators' brain scans show extraordinary development in spatial memory regions, proof that these techniques literally rewired neural pathways. As you drift off for what feels like seconds, but is actually hours, the navigator whispers the old maxim: "The stars will talk, but only to those who stay awake to listen." A sudden squall blots out the stars, and for the first time, you feel genuine panic, until the navigator begins laughing. "This," he explains, "is when true wayfinding begins." He teaches you to track the storm's direction by tasting the rain. Windward showers carry distinct mineral traces, and to gauge distance from lightning flashes by counting the delay before hearing thunder in your sternum rather than your ears. The canoe becomes a living instrument, its creaks and groans telegraphing shifts in swell patterns. The emergency techniques verge on supernatural, reading bioluminescent plankton trails like underwater streetlights, navigating by the electric tingle of approaching land. Some navigators claimed they could feel this in their teeth, or, most remarkably, using the smell of deep ocean trenches as navigational markers. The quirky detail? During prolonged overcasts, masters would lower a calabash into the water and listen for the echo of waves reflecting off distant reefs, an ancient form of sonar. Here's a mainstream fact that defies belief. Polynesian oral histories contain accurate accounts of temporary islands, pumice rafts from underwater eruptions that existed just long enough to be noted in chants before eroding away. Modern geologists have verified several such cases through volcanic records. Historians still argue whether these lost Ailu stories represent actual landfalls or metaphorical warnings about the ocean's fickleness. As the storm clears, revealing stars brighter than you've ever seen, the navigator shares the ultimate secret. Being lost is just the ocean's way of teaching you to pay better attention. The waves seem to hum in agreement beneath you. A navigator's voice takes on a new edge as he mimics the baffled expressions of European explorers who insisted Polynesians were just lucky drifters. You can practically hear Captain Cook's officers scoffing at the idea that these primitive sailors could intentionally navigate thousands of miles, until Tupaya started correcting their charts mid-voyage. The irony? While Europeans struggled with scurvy and mutinies, Polynesian crews were thriving on fermented breadfruit and singing harmonies to maintain stroke rhythm. He recounts how British naval officers would secretly raid Polynesian voyaging canoes for their superior fishing gear and watertight food containers. The quirky detail? European ships often carried Polynesian navigators as local guides, but logged their contributions as mere native assistants. Some particularly arrogant captains even dismissed accurate land predictions as coincidence, until their own instruments proved the islanders right days later. Here's a mainstream fact that rewrites the age of discovery.
Polynesians likely reached South America centuries before Columbus, evidenced by sweet potatoes, a New World crop, appearing in Pacific archaeological sites by 1000 CE. The most damning evidence? Pre-contact Hawaiian chants describe a red-feathered cloak exactly matching those worn by Peruvian nobility. Historians still argue whether these were intentional voyages or accidental driftings. But as your canoe glides past a floating coconut that the navigator identifies as coming from an island group 200 miles west, you realize the real question is why Europeans found Polynesian skills so unbelievable. The navigator sums it up with a shrug. When your only tool is a compass, every solution looks like magnetism. The scent of salt and frangipani blossoms drifts across the deck as the navigator describes the Hawaiian Renaissance of the 1970s, when a handful of elders resurrected nearly extinct wayfinding techniques to sail Hokulea, a replica double-hulled canoe from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments. You can hear the emotion in his voice as he recounts how Mau Pialug, a Micronesian navigator from Satawal, risked his community's disapproval to share sacred knowledge with outsiders, breaking centuries of secrecy. The most moving detail: during that first voyage, young Hawaiian crew members, raised on TV and fast food, had to relearn basic skills like reading clouds for rain and estimating time by the sun's heat on their skin. The quirky part? Modern wayfinders now incorporate plastic bottles and satellite phones as emergency backups, calling it hybrid navigation. Though traditionalists still argue whether this constitutes cheating or evolution. Here's a mainstream fact that gives hope. Today's Polynesian children learn star compasses in school alongside math, and wayfinding apprenticeships have waiting lists. The Hokulea has now circumnavigated the globe using these revived techniques, its crew sending nightly star reports to classrooms via satellite. Historians still debate whether this revival truly replicates ancient methods or creates something new. But as your canoe approaches a familiar atoll, the navigator points out teenagers on the beach practicing wave patterns in sand, proof that the knowledge lives. His whisper carries the weight of centuries. We didn't rediscover wayfinding. It was waiting for us to remember. The stars begin to blur as the canoe enters the lagoon's calm waters, its hull whispering through liquid moonlight. The navigator's voice softens to match the lapping waves as he describes how master wayfinders would end voyages. Not with triumphant shouts, but by releasing a single frigate bird feather into the surf, its spiral descent mirroring the voyager's own return to stillness. You're shown the final ritual, pouring a gourd of open ocean water back into the lagoon, mingling the deep Pacific's essence with the sheltered shallows. The quirky detail? Navigators would often keep one pebble from each new landfall in a special pouch, not as trophies, but as weights to test future beaches' sand, ensuring they could recognize the island again by touch alone. Here's the mainstream truth beneath the poetry. Polynesian navigation wasn't about conquering the ocean, but about learning to move with it, a dance of attention and adaptation that modern GPS has made us forget. The greatest voyages weren't the longest, but those where every crew member returned with new ways to hear the world. As the canoe grounds gently on moonlit sand, the navigator's final words drift like island smoke. The stars will keep their stories. The waves will remember your name. Sleep now, wayfinder. Pause.